Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be making a lunchbox and it measures in at 11 by 5 with a 3-inch depth. It's a great size for a lunchbox, or it even can be converted into a makeup bag. This project is on the easier side, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem. And we're also going to be adding in a few fun features like piping and bias tape. These two techniques can be transferred over to other sewing projects. And with all that being said, if you're new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you're going to want to grab yourself a ½ yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a heavyweight non-stretch canvas, denim, possibly a twill, something that has zero stretch and is very stiff. And I'm going to be using a canvas. I actually use a lighter weight canvas, but that's why I'm saying use a heavier weight canvas, because mine turned out with a little bit of ripple in it, and that's because the fabric wasn't stiff enough to hold the corners with the piping. So if you do pick a canvas, make sure it's nice and stiff. You'll need a ½ yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be a thermal management fabric, something that can contain heat and cool. These fabrics can be tricky to find, so I'll put a link down below to the fabric I used. And this is only if you're going to make a lunchbox. If you're going to make this as a makeup bag, then you don't have to use a thermal fabric. You can just use a regular lightweight fabric. You'll need one 14-inch zipper, and I'm going to be cutting mine off of a roll. This is a great way to go. You can get precise zippers with minimal waste. But if you are buying one at the store, just try to get at least 14 inches. It's going to go past the length of the panel, but we're going to be snipping the zipper ends, so anything that's 14 or higher will work. You'll need a ¼ yard of 1-inch webbing, and this is going to be for the handle on top. You can realistically make this handle out of anything. You don't have to use webbing, but I found using webbing is really easy to work with and makes a nice strong handle. You'll need 2 1-inch lobster clasps, and this is optional. This is if you choose to make it for your backpack. These clips will allow you to clip it to the D-rings on the backpack. And if you want to make that backpack to go with your lunchbox, I'll put a link to the video down below. And lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super simple to use. All you have to do is print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And before you tape it together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And after you gathered all your supplies and printed off your pattern, it's time to move into cutting. And when it comes to the size of the bag, I actually made it this dimension so it sits nicely on that backpack. But if you want to change the size, it's very easy to do. And the easiest way to do that is to change the height. So what you're going to want to do is change the height of the main side panel and the back side panel. So say you want it 1 inch taller, you're going to add 1 inch to the height of the main side panel and 1 inch to the height of the back side panel. This is going to adjust it evenly and you'll follow the same steps. When it comes to the width, that's a little bit harder, but it's not too bad. All you have to do is measure out the circumference after you change the width to make sure it matches up with the length of the side panels. After taping the pattern together, you're going to want to cut on the outside of the black line. You should end up with 2 backside panels, 1 cut out of your thermal fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 main side panels cut on the fold, 1 out of your thermal fabric and 1 out of your main fabric. And lastly, 4 top bottom panels, 2 cut out of your thermal fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing our main side panels. Unfold both panels with the right sides facing up. And before we get started, you're going to want to make sure both of these panels are the exact same size. From here, we're going to cut our zipper so it's longer than the length of the panels. Make sure it sticks off the edge about 1 inch because we're going to trim the zipper end. Place the right side of the zipper on the right side of the main fabric and the thermal fabric lined up on the opposite side with right sides together and stitch at a ¼ inch seam allowance. After stitching, open up the panels so the wrong sides are together. Make sure the outside edges are lined up, and it's very important to have the zipper edges lined up on both sides. Place a few pins and add a top stitch. I'm using an edge presser foot. This is a great way to get even top stitches throughout the bag. After completing the top stitch, double check both sides, make sure the zipper edge is even. Place this panel off to the side and grab your backside panels. Next, we're going to add the backside panels to both sides of our main side panel. Starting with the main fabric, we're going to line it up on the left side with right sides together, and the thermal fabric on the opposite side, sandwiching the main side panel stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After completing the stitch, double check both sides to make sure the edge is even. We're going to open up the panel so the wrong sides are together. With the side edges even, we're going to add a top stitch to our new edge. Take your time sewing over the zipper and snip the zipper end flush with the seam allowance. And next we're going to pull that panel to the opposite side of the main side panel and line up the edge. And we're going to do the same thing for the thermal fabric. It's best to roll up the main side panel so that way it will reach the opposite side. Make sure the right sides are together, the side edges are lined up, and we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing the stitch, we're going to pull the right sides out, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched, flip it around to the back side panel, and top stitch our new seam. And again, you want both of the back panels to be aligned as you're top stitching. At this point, we're going to open up the back side panels and snip the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. Go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite zipper end and place this panel off to the side. Grab your top bottom panels, and we're going to be starting with just one of the main fabric panels, so you can place the other ones off to the side. And using the pattern, we're going to mark out the strap placement guide, cut a 12-inch strip of 1-inch webbing, roll the webbing ends in about 1 to 2 inches. And what we're going to do is place the strap within that strap placement guide, so when you place it on the pattern, you can see that the strap goes up, and that's going to be our handle. And when it comes to this step, it's all preference. If you want the handle to be slimmer, you can pull it out further, or if you want it taller, you can pull it closer together. I'm giving mine a little bit of height so it's easy to grab. After you decided on the height of the handle, we're going to stitch the outside strap ends right up to where it's rolled over. You want to make sure you stitch all the way past that strap end so that way it doesn't fray over time. Feel free to add an X stitch or a couple bar tacks to make it extra strong. After tacking down the handle, we're going to grab one of our thermal panels, flip it so the right side is pointing down, and place our handle panel directly on top with wrong sides together. We're going to be adding piping around the outside edge. I'm just using a pre-made piping. You can make your own piping. There's many ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the simplest way I know with pre-made piping. Start by dethreading about a 1/2 inch of the piping at the tip. You want to dethread enough so that way you can roll that edge over and tuck the opposite end in, giving yourself a nice clean finish. And this will make more sense once we start attaching it. So grab your top panels and place it around the edge about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. The raw edge of the piping will extend past the edge of the panel. The goal is to end the piping in the area we dethreaded. I highly recommend using a piping presser foot. This makes it so much easier to install. The roped area of the piping slides through the presser foot and it keeps it aligned as you're sewing. Most kits come with this presser foot, so I highly recommend looking for it before you start sewing. After attaching the presser foot, you're going to want to feed the piping within the groove on the presser foot and simply start sewing around the edge of the top panel. The presser foot is going to help guide that piping around the curves, giving you a nice, clean, professional look. And when it comes to ending the stitch, you'll want to stop about 1 inch away from your start point. So just stop the stitch and don't snip the piping yet. Before we trim any of the piping, we're going to grab the rope from inside the area we dethreaded, trim the rope in the dethreaded area, and with the rope trimmed, we're going to roll the edge over about a 1/4 inch. Pull the opposite side of the piping towards your start point and snip it directly where the rope ends. Butt the piping up to the snipped end of the rope and you should have a nice complete loop. You may need to trim more rope or piping to fine tune it, and from here we're just going to finish off the stitch. And as you can see, mine's a little offset, but this is something you get better at with time. Place this panel off to the side and grab our opposite 2 top and bottom panels. This is going to form the bottom panel, so we're going to do the exact same thing. Place the wrong sides together and add piping all the way around the outside edge. The biggest thing when it comes to piping is just practice. I recommend practicing on other scrap pieces of fabric until you really get it down. But like always, feel free to skip the piping if you don't want to add it. After adding the piping, we're going to mark out the centers on the top and bottom panel. Make sure the centers match for both panels, and we're going to do the same thing for the main side panel. It's very key to get the correct centers so that way the panels line up. If the centers are off just a little bit, it could throw off the entire alignment of the bag. We're going to start by adding the top panel, so flip the wrong sides out for the main side panel. The back side panel is going to be at the back of the top panel, so find the centers on both the top panel and the back side panel, line those up. Place a pin and you can repeat this step for the rest of the centers. After aligning the centers and placing a few pins, we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, I'm using the piping presser foot. Lock it on over the piping on the top panel, and this is going to help guide you all the way around that outside edge. It's also going to help butt up the side panel directly with the piping, giving you a perfectly clean piping edge. This step does take some time, especially when you're working with thicker fabrics, so go slow and try to be precision as possible going around those curves. After you finished up attaching the top panel, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together. You may want to flip the right side out to see if the panels are lined up directly against that piping. If the presser foot jumped off track, you can always go back in and stitch a little bit closer to the piping to make it nice and clean. Next, we're going to locate the side. I like to do this by tracing down from the handle. Grab your 1-inch lobster clasps and 2 3-inch strips of 1-inch webbing. Feed the webbing through the clasp opening. Roll the ends over to hide the raw edge. And these are going to be used to attach to the backpack, so if you don't want to add them, you can skip ahead. And we're going to place these directly in line with the top handle. And once you've found that correct position, we're going to have the clasp towards the bottom of the webbing. Place a few pins to prevent it from moving around. Do the same thing for the opposite side. And with both aligned with the top handle, we're going to stitch around the outside of the webbing to create a box. And we're doing this the same way we did the top handle, so if you want to add any extra stitches for more strength, feel free to do so. Once you finish adding the clasps, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out and grab your bottom panel. And we're going to do the same thing we did for the top panel. Line up the back center, place a few pins, and repeat the process around the outside edge. Once you have it pinned down, we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around that outside edge. And don't forget to use your piping presser foot to help guide you as you're sewing. And getting these top and bottom panels to look perfect may take a few tries, so I recommend practicing on other fabrics before you actually make your bag, or just de-thread and try it again. So don't get down if yours doesn't come out perfect the first try. And after finishing up the stitch, we're going to double check all the edges one more time to make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, the next step is to add bias tape around the outside edge. And I'm going to run you through a few different methods. The first method is using a bias tape making kit, and this is where you make your own bias tape. It's super simple to do. You cut your bias tape strips, feed it through your folder, and press it as it's coming out your folder. And by picking this method, you get to choose the size and also the color of fabric to match your project. The second method is using a double fold bias tape binder. You install this to your machine and it gives you the ability to sew directly onto your garment. It's a very fast and effective technique. The third technique is using pre-made bias tape. This technique, you're very limited to colors, but it's easy to do. You just fold it over your edge and stitch it down. This is a great way to go if you don't have a lot of tools to work with. And I'm going to be stitching mine on using the double fold bias tape attachment. By far, this is one of the best techniques if you're planning on making a lot of bags, but feel free to use whatever method that works best for you. I do recommend using a water-resistant fabric just in case moisture builds up in the bag. I'm using a lightweight nylon material. It's going to cover up the raw edges and just make for a nice looking clean inside. Flip the right sides out, and the final step is adding your branding. I like to add mine in areas I can clip extra things to. And after making this one with this canvas fabric, I highly recommend using a heavier weight fabric for your main fabric. This one was a little bit lighter weight and it kind of just ripples. It doesn't look that great, but at least I know that now for future projects. And these clips are for the backpack. The backpack is a separate project. I'll link it down below, but it clips right to the backpack and it's super easy to use and everything kind of flows nice and easy with it. When it comes to the clips, you can use different sizes to get a nice tight close fit, or you can kind of play around with the length of the webbing. This will also adjust the actual fit of the bag. But these are fun things to play around with and really customize it to your preference. And there you have it, your lunchbox is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hopefully your bag turned out really good. And if it didn't the first try, that's totally fine. It takes time to really get used to putting piping on and using these sewing techniques. So I highly recommend making it more than once, because every time you make it, it's going to get better and look better. And if you ever have any questions about the pattern or the sewing process, send me a message on my website at properfitclothing.com and I'll get back to you. But like always, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.